It wasn't just a political maneuver, it was a desperate, high stakes gamble to rewrite the very lineage of Russia's imperial future, a secret war waged not with armies but with wills and whispers, all to prevent her own son from ever touching the crown. For decades, Catherine the Great, the legendary enlightened empress, lived in an unspoken battle for succession against the man who was legally her heir, her son, Paul Petrovich. She didn't just dislike him, she actively conspired to bypass him, to disinherit him, to elevate her grandson, Alexander, in his place. In this deep dive, you are about to uncover the shocking truth of a hidden imperial power struggle that fundamentally reshaped Russia's destiny, revealing that the serene, all-powerful Catherine you thought you knew was, behind the palace walls, consumed by a profound and relentless fear of her own child ascending the throne. For generations, the official narrative of Imperial Russia has painted a clear picture. We learn of Catherine the Great, who seized power in 1762, reigning for an extraordinary 34 years. Her era, often called Russia's Golden Age, saw vast territorial expansion, a flourishing of arts and sciences, and a diplomatic prowess that solidified Russia's place as a dominant European power. Historians like Robert Massey, in his acclaimed biographies, detail her intellectual pursuits, her correspondence with Voltaire and Diderot, and her ambitious legislative reforms, even if many remained unimplemented. Her son, Paul, is frequently depicted as a troubled, eccentric figure, perpetually overshadowed by his mother's brilliance, a man perhaps psychologically scarred by his father's violent overthrow and sudden death. We often hear of his later, brief and notoriously despotic reign of just 5 years, culminating in his assassination in 1801, a stark contrast to his mother's long and glorious rule. And then there's Alexander, Catherine's grandson, whom she supposedly adored and personally guided, seeing in him the true heir to her enlightened ideals, a future emperor she groomed with meticulous care. This narrative suggests a natural progression, Catherine's genius followed by Alexander's promise, with Paul as an unfortunate but ultimately minor interlude. It's a clean story, a logical flow of power and intellect, a comfortable history. But what if I told you that beneath this carefully constructed facade of imperial grandeur and smooth succession lay a tangled web of genuine paranoia, desperate maneuvers, and outright betrayal? What if the official history deliberately obscured a continuous, decades-long covert operation by the Empress herself, not just to diminish her son, but to systematically remove him from the succession entirely? Imagine the chilling reality: the most powerful woman in Europe, systematically undermining the legitimate claim of her only son for more than 20 years. The real story, unearthed through a meticulous examination of private letters, discarded manifestos, and court testimonies often brushed aside as mere gossip, reveals a much darker, more urgent struggle. Catherine's profound distrust of Paul began almost immediately after she deposed his father, Peter III. Was it because Paul was Peter's legitimate son, a living reminder of the coup? Or perhaps a deeper, more personal animosity fueled by her own complex relationship with Peter? We'll never know the full psychological truth. What we do know definitively from the writings of contemporaries like Friedrich Melchior Grimm, Catherine's longtime correspondent, is that she viewed Paul as fundamentally unfit to rule. She saw him as volatile, intellectually inferior, and prone to the same dangerous instability that she believed plagued his father. But dismissing him as simply unfit wasn't enough. She needed a concrete plan to ensure he never took the throne. Her strategy was multi-pronged and ruthless. First, she kept Paul largely isolated from meaningful government affairs. While he was given a grand household and titles, he was deliberately excluded from the inner workings of the state, denied real military command, and confined to his private estates like Gatchina. Think about that for a moment. The heir apparent, kept in a gilded cage, deliberately denied the experience crucial for future leadership. Simultaneously, Catherine poured all her hopes and considerable energy into her grandson, Alexander, Paul's eldest son. Her letters, particularly those to Grimm and other confidants, are filled with her grand designs for Alexander's education. She personally oversaw every aspect, commissioning specific tutors, creating curriculum, and even writing his textbooks. According to historical texts like Henri Troyat's Alexander of Russia, Catherine envisioned Alexander as a truly enlightened monarch, unburdened by the perceived flaws of his father. She was essentially creating a parallel heir, a successor groomed in her own image, completely bypassing Paul. This wasn't merely doting grandmother behavior, it was a political project of immense scale and profound intent. The most damning evidence, however, lies in the secret documents Catherine drafted. Imagine the scene, deep in her private study, away from prying eyes. She drafted at least 2 separate manifestos during her reign, explicit decrees intended to be published upon her death, formally disinheriting Paul and naming Alexander as her immediate successor. These documents, discovered much later in the Imperial archives, are not vague suggestions or passing thoughts. They are legal instruments of succession, meticulously constructed to transfer the crown directly from empress to grandson. One such draft, known as Catherine's Political Testament, clearly states her intention to bypass Paul, citing his alleged incompetence and instability. That's not merely disapproval. That's an active, written declaration of war against her son's birthright. But Paul, for all his perceived eccentricities, was not oblivious. He knew his mother's intentions, and he fought back in his own way. At his Gatchina estate, far from the splendor of St. Petersburg, he created his own microcosm of military might, a personal army of soldiers trained in Prussian fashion, fiercely loyal to him. Historian W. Bruce Lincoln details how Paul meticulously drilled these troops, building a military faction that would prove critical in securing his eventual, albeit brief, succession. This was his counter-scheme. If his mother sought to disinherit him by decree, he would ensure his right by force of arms, a loyal following ready to back his claim. The imperial court for 2 decades was a silently vibrating string of tension between mother and son, each building their own support base, each maneuvering for the inevitable succession crisis. This revelation fundamentally changes how we view Catherine the Great. The enlightened empress becomes a strategic, even ruthless political operator, willing to shatter traditional succession laws for the sake of her vision of Russia. Her reign, far from being a period of unchallenged glory, was undercurrent with a constant, simmering power struggle. We can no longer see her actions towards Paul as merely maternal disappointment. They were calculated, systematic attempts at political annihilation of her son's future. Consider the subsequent reign of Paul. His erratic, often tyrannical behavior, his sudden shifts in policy, his obsession with military discipline. Was this truly just inherent instability? Or was it the bitter, desperate reaction of a man who had spent over 20 years in the shadow of his mother's profound contempt, constantly fearing disinheritance, feeling his legitimacy questioned at every turn? His reign, in this new light, appears less as an inexplicable aberration and more as the violent, overcorrected pendulum swing of a man finally grasping power after decades of existential threat. And what of Alexander, the grandson whom Catherine so carefully molded? He was caught in the middle of this dynastic tug-of-war, forced to reconcile his grandmother's profound influence with his father's very real existence and claim. This constant tension, this forced duality, surely shaped his own enigmatic and often contradictory rule. Historian Roderick E. McGrew's analysis of Alexander I highlights the internal conflict of an emperor who was at once liberal and authoritarian, pious and calculating. Could this deep-seated psychological struggle, born from Catherine's secret war, be the very root of Alexander's famously complex personality and reign? This hidden power struggle wasn't merely a family squabble, it was a profound trauma at the heart of the Russian autocracy. It demonstrates that the stability of the Romanov dynasty, often portrayed as monolithic, was in fact perpetually vulnerable to the personal machinations and profound anxieties of its rulers. It shows us that even an empress as dominant as Catherine could not entirely escape the deeply ingrained dynastic anxieties that plagued the court. It changes how you perceive the very nature of imperial power in Russia, illustrating that succession was never a given, but a brutal, often silent contest for legitimacy. From this moment on, when you think of Catherine the Great, you won't just see the enlightened sovereign. You'll see the empress with the pen in her hand, drafting secret decrees, battling her own flesh and blood for the future of an empire, forever fearing the shadow of her son. You'll understand that the grand narratives of history are often built upon the quiet omissions, the inconvenient truths deliberately swept under the archival rug. The official story is rarely the whole story. And the deeper you look into the historical record, the more you realize that the most profound insights often lie hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to challenge what we thought we knew. The discoveries waiting in the archives are endless, and the next one promises to be just as astonishing.